we're gonna get into the actually Ohio State's conference, so to speak, the Big Ten conference, and all the upgrades, at coaches that were hired. I mean, from Matt Rule to Luke Fickell, just the state, the current status of how the Big Ten is kind of shaping out to be. And seems like it's going for the better rather than just having, two or three teams that are kind of dominant throughout the entire year. So it's good to see these changes. Good to see people that can turn around programs. I mean, we've seen what Fickle did in Cincinnati, what Matt Rule has done. I mean, obviously he's coming from the Panthers, and that didn't quite work out the same way it did in college. But outside of that, I think everybody can agree that he's great at changing programs. So I mean, what's your thoughts on all the changes in the Big Ten?
Yeah, great hires, solid hires, home run hires. Really, if you think of who's available and the type of programs they are, and the type of leaders and coaches that they got to take them over, um, you know, the Big Ten has always been kind of in this somewhat of a competition with the SEC. I mean, the SEC is kind of known as the best conference in college football. The Big Ten has been a somewhat of a close second. If you talk to an SEC fan, they think they're far and away the best conference, but realistically, the Big Ten is a lot closer than all the other conferences.
Right.
We saw the shift in the SEC over the past few years, getting kind of these stacked programs with great head coaches, and it being just a lion's den of a season, trying to go against all these other guys. And we saw what that's done. It's been catching up, and it's one of the reasons why the SEC is where it's at right now. Kirby Smart has really changed around that Georgia program, brought them to the forefront, brought them to prominence. We see the changes in Tennessee. It's a program that has been historically bad for the past like 2 decades or so. Completely get turned around between last year and this year. Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss is another one. We see what's happening in South Carolina with Shane Beamer. Arkansas, Sam Pittman. It goes on and on. Solid coaches. The Big Ten is kind of getting their little own version of this now. We see, obviously the Ohio State program is always going to have a solid coach with their tradition. Ryan Day, despite that loss, is one of the best coaches in college football. Jim Harbaugh is really proving himself. Look, we know he's a good head coach. We saw what he did with the 49ers, taking the team to the Super Bowl. You don't do that as okay head coach,
yeah,
especially
exactly.
without it's not like he had some superstar quarterback carrying his team, or, like somebody could say about, say, an NBA with LeBron. Oh, you had LeBron to win it.
Yeah,
Or,
so it's like,
if you had Brady to win it. No, he's winning it with
yeah,
his
Colin
team.
Kaepernick and Alex Smith.
Yeah,
So
and coaching his way to victory. So he's certainly proven, and with the past two iterations of the game this year and last year, coming away with wins, even more proving himself. But now you keep a guy like James Franklin. He's there at Penn State. His only two losses were to Ohio State and Michigan. They've been playing solid. They have a super young team. They're going to be stacked next year. Solid team next year. Mel Tucker, bad year at Michigan State this year, but can't forget what he did last year. With a few guys in the transfer portal, he took his team to a very, very solid, respectable win total, and really got the job done. Now you bring in a coach like Luke Fickell in a place like Wisconsin, like you talked about, Cincinnati, really brought them to prominence. I mean, to get a team like that into the college football playoff says a
huge.
lot.
Yeah.
Not to mention they had the second most amount of players drafted that year, right?
Right.
So to do that at a place like Cincinnati, you go to the Big Ten to a program like Wisconsin, he's going to do very well there, right?
Yeah.
Very, very well there. So he's going to, certainly be a headache for these other coaches in the Big Ten. You talked about Matt Rule. We saw what he did at Baylor right after the whole controversy and scandal over there. Completely rebuilt that program. He didn't do as good of a job in the NFL, but the NFL is tough, man. You got to get guys to buy in. College is certainly what he knows how to do best. He's definitely a program rebuilder,
Right.
and he's going to be able to rebuild a program like Nebraska, who has a huge rabid fan base. Gets very overlooked these days because Nebraska hasn't been good, but man, if he could, start having some success there, it's going to really light that place up.
Yeah.
And I expect him to do a lot better than, Scott Frost did. So,
yeah. And it'll be good for Luke Fickell. I mean, he's coming back to the Big Ten. We known that he coached Ohio State. I think it was substantial that he was able to get Cincinnati into the playoffs last year. To sustain that level of play and to sustain that in Cincinnati, I think is kind of tough. Although I did think he did a good job this year. But I think it's like with him, with his hire specifically, I think it's like he got out at the right time, because you don't want to be one of those coaches where it's like you set that standard the year before and it's like, okay, we can make the playoffs, but at the same time, it's like that's not the reality of it. The reality is you're not gonna have a bunch of 5-star recruits come into Cincy, and you're gonna be able to compete with all these other teams in the playoffs.
yeah, it's a hard way to build. And, look, they were moving to the Big 12 next year,
Right.
but huge loss for the Big 12. You had a guy like Luke Fickell, would have been great to have in the Big 12, really help that conference as a whole, bring some more notoriety, being a really great head coach. Now goes off to the Big Ten, which, by the way, the feeling around that hire is, one, it's a good hire because obviously Luke Fickell's a good coach. Two, he knows the Big Ten, having spent time at Ohio State coaching, but he might be putting himself in perfect position to be the next Ohio State head coach at some point down the line. Now, whether that be, maybe things don't go well for Ryan Day, maybe Ryan Day is just there for a few more years and then he ends up going off to the NFL or something like that. But Luke Fickell has already publicly acknowledged that that would be a job that he covets and that he would take. So, I mean, being at Wisconsin is a perfect place to set yourself up. Yeah, to be a head coach in the Big Ten. You already know how to recruit the area, being in Wisconsin, right? And already having ties to Ohio State. He does well there. If Ryan Day does great and he never wants to leave, then he could probably stay there as long as he wants if he, maintains the level of success that Ohio State expects. But if not, Luke Fickell's right there. And as soon as things went bad this past week, the first thing people said was, why don't we go hire Luke Fickell? Yeah. And then next thing you know, he pops up with Wisconsin.
Wisconsin job,
yeah, certainly interesting thing to watch. But yeah, look, Big Ten as a whole, it looks great getting all these coaches. And look, that's what the TV money deal does. Like they have that huge TV deal. Teams have the money. Go get the good coaches. Go get the best of the best. Bring them to the Big Ten. That's going to bring you the better players, and that's going to have you compete in a level where, you can be in the upper echelon with the SEC. And perhaps, there's a chance they could surpass them if everything goes right. We know Nick Saban is kind of towards the tail end of his career. Obviously, you have Kirby Smart over there and the other programs. But look, you have USC coming to the Big Ten with Lincoln Riley. Who knows what happens with Chip Kelly? But if he comes over with UCLA, all of a sudden, it's a lot of great coaches in the Big Ten. So things change pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think as time goes on with the college football expansion, it'll make things a lot more interesting, considering the fact that obviously conference championships are going to mean something, but outside of that, it's like there's so many great teams in the Big Ten. It'll be interesting to see who's able to get into the playoffs, who's able not to get into the playoffs. And obviously it'll just be great. I think it's a lot of it's trending upward for the Big Ten, and it's great to see considering the college football landscape. So